Week 6 of 15. We're getting there, we're getting there. Weekly modules, week 6. All right, this is our last week with short fiction. So this week we're going to be wrapping that up. I decided not to give a test on short fiction. Instead, we're going to have a little project to do that's due at the end of the week so that you can demonstrate your ability to analyze the short fiction elements. And then we'll be finished with short fiction. Next week, we're moving on to poetry. So we'll be moving to a different section in the textbook, and there's a short reading assignment to kind of prep you for next week when we start poetry. And of course, we have the paper that we're working on. That one is due a week from Saturday. So you should be kind of like in the middle of that in some drafting stage, that kind of thing with the paper. I'm going to spend some time today talking about that. Okay, updates. Probably you saw my notification on Google Classroom that the school board met last week and they decided to extend virtual learning at least through October 26th for most people. There's one group of students that they are welcoming onto campus this week, and that's students who don't have any connectivity for whatever reason. The hotspots don't work at their house, or they don't have equipment, they don't have a device. They're going to be opening up school for those students like in the computer labs, and so they're going to be there working independently on their online stuff. So if you know somebody, obviously if you're here, that's not you, but if you know somebody, you have a family member, somebody in your neighborhood, from church, whatever, who has kids who haven't been able to even get started with the school year because they don't have the connectivity or the materials, the devices, then please let them know to contact their school. This is district-wide. So they're making allowances for students who need a place and equipment and Wi-Fi to go to the computer labs pretty much on the different campuses. And there's bus service and all that stuff. So if you know anybody who just hasn't even been able to start school yet because of that, maybe make sure they know that next week, or maybe it's Wednesday, maybe it's tomorrow that starts, the 30th, right? And everyone else who might have chosen hybrid, that's going into the 26th and may go until Thanksgiving. I think they're going to file another extension and start to feed some of the student populations in before Thanksgiving. So, I don't know, it's looking like basically the whole first semester's virtual. Right now, the teachers have to go back on the 21st. So we'll see how that goes. Anything about school? That's why I'm still here in my glorious dining room. Command Central, I call it. No, not Command Central, right? There's supposed to be a college fair this week for juniors and seniors. I posted on that in Google Classroom last week. STC doesn't want us using Google Classroom, but I feel like everybody gets their notifications, so that's kind of like the fastest way to get information to you, so I tend to do it that way. Somebody told me yesterday that our college fair was yesterday, so hopefully you got the notification last week. But on the classroom, let me go to our class here. I have all these reminders. You can go to this website, it's under the classwork tab, and you can see the website where you can register for that, and then there are also some instructions for that. So if you're interested in that, you might check and see if it is over. I got the idea from the counselors that it was happening all week, but I don't know if that's logical. But you can go to that website and see if it's still going on. They're gonna have like 300 colleges there. So it might be really good, especially for juniors who might be, kind of trying to branch out and see what's available to them. But that's going on. Another update that I wanted to talk to you about, seniors, remember that you should be working on the Apply Texas process. And I've been looking at essays. Some students have been sending me their admissions essays, and I've been looking through them and giving feedback. So if you're in that situation, you can certainly share your essay with me and I will give you my ideas on it. There's a seminar that I created right here that has videos of me walking you through different elements of the admissions essay. So that's an option for you also, seniors. And then I just put the counselor's webpage there. FAFSA is opening on Thursday. FAFSA is the financial aid application. Everybody has to fill that out. I always get students who are like, oh, I'm not going to get any financial aid. My parents are too wealthy or whatever. But you have to get what they call the EFC score, which stands for expected family contribution. That number you're going to have to put on a number of other applications. So FAFSA is starting. I put the link there in case you wanted to get started. You need a PIN. You have to fill out a thing and get a PIN, and then you can start doing financial aid. Financial aid is like a bank account, in case you didn't know. You have to apply for it every year, and they use it up. Like it all goes away every year, and then they, put more in. So the people who apply sooner get their full amount. If you wait, financial aid's still open in June next year. But if you wait that long, then there might not be funds there for you. So it's kind of like, first come, first served on that. So that's why the counselors want you to kind of have your FAFSA and your Apply Texas pretty much done at the end of October, seniors. So if you need any help with that, especially with the essay, just let me know. I'm looking at maybe 5 or 6 essays a day from students that want me to look at their essays and give them some feedback. So usually takes me about a day to go through those, depending on how many I have piling up. Any questions on any of these updates? No. Okay. All right. All right, so let's talk about this week. This week, I want us to spend a good deal of time talking about the critical lenses. I don't think that it's a difficult topic, but I think it might be a new topic. So I want to spend a little bit of time going over the 2 new ones that you studied for last week, generally, and also talk about how those are going to work with your paper, go over some of the details about the paper. Maybe more of it will make sense since you've started it. And so I want to go through the critical lenses first, and then I'm going to talk about the paper. I'm seeing some things starting to pop up over on that menti.com. That's good. So the 2 critical lenses that you needed to look at for today are the feminism gender lens and the Marxist or economic lens. And so I want to do an overview of those just like I did the other 3 last week. And then I do want to touch on the 3 from last week too, just as a refresher. I asked a question on the formative about applying the archetypal perspective to one of the stories. I think it was The Nightingale and the Rose. And I think there's some people who need, like, it would help if I went over the archetypal perspective a little bit. And so I'm going to go through these 3 again, just to help you with your paper, because the paper requires that you choose one of them, right? So let's start with the 2 for this week. The first one is the feminine or gender perspective. And this one has to do with the idea that there's been an imbalance of power throughout history between men and women. And the idea of that power struggle has existed for a long time. And so when we look at the feminist perspective, we start to just put on the lens of the fact that a long time ago, there was the idea that men and women were not equal. And so when we look at pieces from those time periods, like Yellow Wallpaper, he almost treats her like a child, right, in that story. So when we look at those stories, we have to put on the perspective of the time period a little bit, but also recognize that there was an imbalance of power between men and women. So that's where we get into like the oppression and patriarchal situation. She has to listen to him. He doesn't have to listen to her. We can find lots of examples of that in literature. Also, the feminist viewpoint lens has extended a little bit into gender studies and gender fluidity. So this is the idea that gender is a construct, that the idea of what makes someone feminine or what makes someone masculine is dependent on a lot of factors within a society. So when we look through this lens, what we're really doing is we're looking to see, what does it mean to say that you're female? What does it mean to say that you're male in this environment that this piece is written in? I think that it's a good idea to, if you're trying to apply these lenses to your paper, like maybe you've looked at the different stories that you can choose from for your essay. I think that if you're trying to find which lens would work, what you should do is start asking you these questions. The way these PowerPoints are set up has like a little overview of the perspective to help you understand what that lens is doing. But then they get into these questions. So if I was looking at a story like Secret Lion, which is one of the ones on your options for your paper, then I would start to ask myself these questions. How is the relationship between men and women portrayed? And I would think about that in the context of that story. What are the power relationships between men and women? I would start asking myself those questions. Now, if I couldn't really answer those questions, like in Secret Lion, I can't really answer those questions, then the feminist perspective is not a good lens to use with that story. Not every lens works with every story. So I think that if you kind of go to these PowerPoints and start asking yourself, which of these questions, there's more on the next page, right? Which lens gives me the most, sort of feedback and ideas and things that I could write about with that story, that would be a signal that that's a good lens to use with that story. But if I go and try to apply these questions to like 11, it's not really going to work because that's not, the feminist or gender issue isn't that significant in that story. So the way that you can figure out which lens would work best is to start asking yourself these questions about that story. Hopefully that makes sense. And those questions are in each one of the 5 slideshows. So that's the feminist or gender perspective. The other one for today is the Marxist, sometimes we call it the social or the economic viewpoint. This one is pretty pervasive. Reader response is probably the one that would work with any story, but the Marxist one can work with most stories. That's because this lens has to do with the idea that people are driven by economic factors. People are driven by their ability to make and spend money or be successful in a society based on that. And we know that's true in society in general. That's a humanity thing. People make decisions all the time based on finances. You're probably going to make a college decision based majorly on finances. So the idea is that we behave based on those economic factors. The choices that we make, the morals that we have, say something about our position in society. And our position in society has a lot to do with how much money we make. That's just the way that it is. So what that leads to is number 2. The idea in Marxism, or sort of like the roots of communism, is the idea that, I don't know if have you guys read any Marx in history? Maybe? Karl Marx?
Not that I remember.
Not that you remember? Okay. Well, Karl Marx is sometimes called like the father of communism, and communism in its concept, not in its application, because it doesn't really work in real life. It's more of an idea. So the idea is that the wealthy class exploits the working class for their own benefit. And we know that that happens also because we have people who own large conglomerates and they pay their employees the least amount that they can get away with so that they can make more money for their company. There's something in the chat here. That's biased. Yeah, of course it is. So that what we're saying is that, yeah, we have to take that bias into consideration when we read pieces of literature sometimes. And the unequal power structure. Really, the feminism lens and the Marxist lens are both about a power struggle. And so there's this ongoing power struggle between the haves and the have-nots. The have-nots are always trying to work hard to improve themselves, and the haves are trying to improve themselves by keeping the other ones down. That's the concept there. And that shows up in a lot of ways. It shows up in education, funding. I mean, that's still a concept in our society today. You know, corporations and CEOs get rich off of the backs of the people working on the manufacturing line, you know. So that's the idea here. And we have to keep into consideration that there is an unequal power structure in society, because the wealthy class has control over the working conditions and the money that, I mean, the wealthy class has power over how the working class gets their money and their working conditions. And that's true going back probably pre-industrial revolution. So number 3 is probably the thing to remember about Marxism, and that's that literature is a product of social and cultural conflict. So lots of stories come from this clash between the people who have a viewpoint that is economically advantaged and people who have a viewpoint that is economically disadvantaged. And we can see a lot of conflicts like that. Is that in every story? No, that's not in every story. Or it's only mild in some stories. I mean, if you think about a story like 56 to 0, you can say to yourself, well, you know, the Marxist lens isn't super strong there. I can see evidence of it though. I can see that Ray Arthur probably went to that school because he had a scholarship. If he was a stellar player, then he probably would have been recruited to a different school. We can also see that his family is working class and unable to help him in any way, really. They go to support him at his football game, but they don't help him in other ways to help him get an advantage in his life, because they don't have the wherewithal to do that. If he was, you know, the son of a billionaire, I think it wouldn't even be a story, right? It wouldn't be the same kind of story that we see, because he's from the working class. So I could probably write a paper about that, but I don't think it's the most prominent element there. So if you see a societal or an economic influence, then start asking yourself these questions about the story. And there's more on the next page, right? And if you start getting answers and it's giving you ideas, then probably that will fuel your thesis for whatever story that you're going to be writing about. So I would definitely go back to these slideshows and use these questions to help you figure out which lens would be the best one. You're not using more than one lens, and you're not using more than one story. One story, one lens, both of them are your choice. So pick one where you can really dive into it. Are there any questions on, or anything I can go over in more depth on the Marxist or the feminist lenses? I know that the lens idea is a little bit, you know, theoretical for you. It's usually new for people. All right, let me go through the other 3 just as a little bit of a refresher, because I know you're in the stage of writing your paper where it would probably be helpful. So remember that reader response is going to be like the default. That works with almost every story, because reader response is the idea that a writer puts an idea out there, but it's not completed until the reader meets it and makes their interpretation of the piece, that it's the 2 things hand in hand. So you've done work like that in the past where your teacher says, oh, write a paragraph about how you see yourself in this character, or write a paragraph that's text to self or text to world. And in that way, you're trying to bring the story into your own experience. You bring your own experiences to the story, the author's giving you the story, and those 2 overlap and there's meaning there. So reader response works with almost every piece. So if you feel like the other ones don't really work, or, you know, it confuses you to think about them, then I would really think about doing reader response as your lens. The archetypal lens is the one that I saw people kind of generalizing about on their formatives. And when people generalize, it makes me think that maybe I should go over it and reteach it a little bit, because if we're being vague about it, we might not have a complete understanding. And it's okay, it takes a while to, you know, for these concepts. They're not immediate, you have to work with them. So the archetypal perspective, I put all the PowerPoints here so they were all in one spot for you. But remember, this is the perspective that says, you know what, we've seen this before, which is dealt with a lot in that summer reading book, How to Read Literature Like a Professor. We've seen this before. We've seen this character, we've seen this dynamic, we've seen this interaction, we've seen this before. This is a repeat. I think the question I asked last week on the formative was about how you could apply the archetypal perspective to the nightingale and the rose. And the archetype in that story has to do with the characterization of youth. There are two young people in that story. There's the student and the girl that he's trying to, I don't know, dance with. And so that story is about sacrifice on the bird's part, but it's also about the behavior of youth. And the behavior of youth is stereotypical in that story. So when you think about archetype, it's a fancy word, but you can just think stereotype. What's stereotypical about those young people? They're selfish. They're oblivious to the sacrifices of others. They're, quick to make decisions, melodramatic, all of those things. Now, I'm not saying every young person is like that, but that's stereotypically the time in your life where you get to be like that. If you're still like that when you're 40, people don't want to be around you because you're supposed to grow out of those things, but when you're 14, when you're 16, when you're 18, we tolerate that because you're still trying to figure out, who you are as a person. But those characteristics, that selfishness of youth, that obliviousness to the sacrifices of others, you can see that in yourself, in your siblings, in, other people your age, because maybe you're not even aware of how much other people sacrifice for your comfort, for your education, for your ability to have certain things. When you're in your 20s, you might look back and say, you know what, my mom never really bought new shoes for a long time. I wonder why. Well, probably so that you could have new shoes, right? So I'm not saying that it's bad or that every young person is like that, but there's this stereotype of young people like that. Think about teachers. You can think about any walk of life. You can think about politicians. There's a certain stereotype that goes with that, lawyers. And so when those things pop up in literature, we say that it's like a stereotype. I've seen a young person before, and boy, are these two characters just exactly that. Their scenario is different, but their attitudes, the way that they handle themselves, that student is like, it's a typical melodramatic teenager. Oh, I can't find a rose anywhere. Whatever will I do? Oh, right? And maybe that's an exaggeration, but if you spend any time in the cafeteria, I'm not going to say it's too far off from some reactions of some people sometimes. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about archetype, the stereotypical qualities of the characters, or the setting. A murder mystery has certain qualities to it that are just standard. And so when we talk about archetype, that's what we're talking about. What about this has the ring of, this is classic. This is the concept that we see over and over and over again. And that's what an archetype is. So maybe go back a little bit also to your summer reading book, because Foster deals a lot with that in that book. So some people, what they did on their formative was they just sort of summarized the nightingale and the rose, or they talked about what the bird was doing, or they did characterization. So you're going to see my comments are sometimes gently trying to get people to see how that story is archetypal. Yeah. Also, Nightingale and the Rose goes against archetype in a way. Same thing, 56 to 0. Both of those stories, interestingly enough, have a surprise ending because we're conditioned to think that they're going to end a certain way. 56 to 0, we're conditioned that they're going to have a comeback, that Ray, the downtrodden, hero, is going to make good and get an improvement on his situation. And T.C. Boyle doesn't give that to us. Instead, we get further failure. Because I don't know if you were counting at the end of that story, but his whole point was that he wanted to have a better outcome than 56 to 0, which was the score of the previous game. And if you're really looking at the way the score goes at the end, the score of the last game is 57 to 0. So he makes it even worse. And so it goes against the type. We're used to, oh, let's throw Rudy on our shoulders and we have a football hero. Or the same thing in Nightingale and the Rose. We're used to the guy gets the rose and then he gets the girl and happily ever after. But Oscar Wilde doesn't give us that either. So those go against archetype in a way. It might be interesting to do a paper. Well, you don't have the option of those stories, but you know, what is on archetype and what goes against archetype in a story might be interesting. So just like the other ones, you have these questions, right? So if you're looking at one of the stories and you start getting some ideas from these questions, then that's a good lens to use. But if you're not, if you look at it and you're like, I don't know, I don't think it works with this story, then don't use that one. The last one, New Historicism, I think we touch on this a lot, but just a reminder that New Historicism is a reminder that we have to look through a historic lens when we read some pieces. If we're looking at modern pieces, we don't have to do that. If we're reading 56 to 0, we don't have to try to think about the perspective from that time period because it's modern. But if we read something like Yellow Wallpaper, a lot of people are like, oh, her husband is so demeaning to her. Yes, he is in a 2020 mindset, but for the time period, that was normal. So we have to, New Historicism just says we have to take the story, the piece of literature as a product of its time. And we can't put the way that time has moved on onto that story. We can't, you know, say, oh, well, he shouldn't treat his wife like that, because that's how lots of people treated their wives back then. We just have to understand its place in history, and that time in history affected not just the piece, but also the author. And many times the author is using that quality to make a social comment about things. I mean, even in that piece that we read about the Yellow Wallpaper, when Charlotte Gilman writes about why she wrote it, she was trying to affect change. She was trying to say, look, this is how it is and it's not right. And the story is a mechanism to try to get that change. But that change has already occurred for us. I mean, it's lucky that women, well, at least women in America, don't have to deal with that kind of oppression, right? That's illegal. It's illegal to lock your wife in the attic, FYI, or chain her to a bed, just in case you wondered. All right. I don't know if I went through that in a way that was repetitive to you, or if it was helpful to you, or if it was too fast. I don't really know, because all I see are little squares over here. So unless you tell me, then I will move on. First, I'll make some faces while I'm waiting. Thumbs up. Okay.
I think we're good.
You think we're good?
Yes.
I think you're good. I don't know about everybody else. You're only answering for yourself, right?
Yes.
Okay. My worry is that it's our first paper, and you know, I want to make sure everybody's got what they need with it. So maybe I don't need to worry and everybody's got it, or maybe I'm a tough grader, FYI, in case you haven't heard. Mr. Ramos is meaner in class, but an easier grader. And I'm nicer in class, but a tougher grader is what they tell me. That's what they say. Okay, well then let's move on and talk about the paper and go over that, because I'm starting to see some questions pop up over on Menti, and that's good. I can address them. I went through this with you last week. I want to go through it again now that you are probably a little ways into it. If you haven't started, my recommendation is that you get started. Remember that you have until Monday, which is the 5th, to ask me to look at your paper for you, to give you some feedback. After the 5th, I'm not going to do that anymore. So if you want some feedback, get going on it. It doesn't have to be a complete essay. You can send me your first paragraph and say, am I on the right track? Or send me your thesis and say, does it seem like it would work? I can give you feedback on portions of the essay if you like. But usually what happens in my experience is I'll get a couple over the next couple of days. I already have maybe 3 that people have submitted, rough drafts. I'll get a couple more this weekend, because some people wait into the weekend to really dig into a longer assignment like that. and then I'll get 5 or 6 on Monday. And that takes me a while to go through them. So it might be a day or two before I'm able to return all of them. And that way there's still time for the students to work on them before they're due on Saturday the 10th. So that's why I back off the date. It's not fair to send me, 10 papers on Friday night when the paper's due Saturday. I'm just not gonna do that, especially when we've had 2 weeks to work on the paper. So plan ahead or take your fate into your hands. So let me go through the paper and I'll answer questions. If something comes to mind, you can either unmute and ask me, you can put it in the chat, you can go to Menti. I mean, I don't know any other ways to, 3 different ways that you can ask me questions or give me feedback. All right, so I put in information about each one. These go to the PowerPoints, these links, but then there's also information in your textbook on these. So I put the page numbers in there that correspond to the different lenses. Here are the stories that you can choose from. These are the only stories that you can choose from. They're either in your text, there's 4 choices from the text and 3 choices from PDF. I don't want you to use any other story. So make sure that you choose one of the ones that's listed there. It's a wide variety of stories there, so you have a good smattering of options. I would think by now that you would have chosen the story that you want to work with and probably narrowed down which lenses could work, and you need to come down to one more, but down to 1. So 1 story, 1 lens. If you write about 1 story, 2 lenses, that's not the assignment. So make sure that you're sticking with what you're being asked to do. Under requirements here, make sure that you are setting up your page in MLA format. We are not using, if you do a works cited, it's only one thing on the works cited, and that will be the story and the author. But you do need to set your paper up in MLA format. This should not be new for you. If you've been taking college classes, there's nothing new about that. But I did link it here in case you need a refresher. Maybe last year you were doing a lot of APA and you need to refresh your memory about MLA, but this is about margins. It's about how to do the header, how to do the first page, how to do the date. There's a sample here. It needs to look like this. You don't get to do it any way that you want and have a successful paper. So you have to have your header. It has to be spaced this way. It has to be reoccurring on the pages with the page numbers changing. Your heading has to look like this. The date has to be like that. You don't underline the title, like it looks just like this. So if it deviates from that, is it points off? Yes, it is. Do people fail this paper because they don't set it up right? No, but you're not going to make an A or a B. Likewise, if you have too many grammatical errors, I've seen papers fail because the format isn't right and they have way too many grammatical errors and it just added up and they failed the paper. So pay attention to details. So this is what it should look like. If you are worried about your format, there's another thing that you can do. You can start setting it up, send it to me and say, is this properly formatted? And I'm the one grading it, so I'll tell you, yes, this, no, that, change this, the margin's not an inch, all of that stuff ahead of time. So that's what it looks like. We're not using section headings. You could, but I don't think you'll need to in a 4-page paper. So there's a page here where you can get that information and it's linked right here on the assignment. You'll have a source, but it'll only be 1 item. Make sure your paper's thesis driven. We talked about that last time. The thesis should include which story and which lens and what you intend to say about that lens in that story. So it should have all 3 of those elements. If you're not sure about how to write a thesis, then that's the time to email me and tell me that, and maybe we'll set up a time for a Zoom call or we can talk through it or whatever. So there are lots of opportunities to make sure that you do well in this paper. Now length, it has to hit the bottom of page 4. So really what you're thinking about is it needs to stop somewhere on page 5. So if it goes over to page 5, then your works cited you have to hit enter all the way down until the works cited is on page 6. We don't count works cited in the page count. So you don't write 3 pages of your essay and include 1 item on the works cited and say that that's 4 pages. The text of the essay has to be at the bottom of page 4 minimum. but you should be shooting for somewhere on page 5. If you write the paper and it's too short and you've exhausted all of your ideas, there's another time where you could send it to me. Maybe I can think of another angle that you might want to add to your thesis to extend your paper just enough to get it to finish in the length that's necessary. So you can think about that too. Original ideas, I'm going to talk about that a little bit more when I talk about the academic integrity part at the bottom. All right, I think I've already talked about how you can share your essay with me for some feedback. I'll tell you, maybe I should make this clear because last year I think some students were surprised about this. I'm not going to edit your paper. I'm not going to proofread it. I'm not going to fix your commas and your capitalization and all that stuff. That's for you to do. Use Grammarly, use something that's going to help you do that. I will make a comment that says you have a lot of comma mistakes. And if I feel like, you know, I need to show you what you're, like if you're making one mistake over and over and over again, I'll probably make a note about it in the margin, trying to teach you what's wrong with that. But I'm not going to go through and fix all of your little mistakes. That's not for this level of work. So if you want to sit down and go through it with me, then I'm glad to do that on a separate time, but I'm not going to be editing your paper in that way. Instead, what I'll be doing is making comments about things that I think you could improve on before you turn your final draft in. For some people, that's grammar or spelling, or some people forget to capitalize I over and over again. I'll bring it to your attention, but I'm not going to fix them all for you. You're going to have to go and do that. So if you share your paper with me by the 5th, then I can give you some feedback. And then the final draft is due on the 10th. Remember that the penalty every day, every calendar day that your assignment is late, is 10 points. So, you know, it's due on the 10th for full points. If you turn it in after that, then I'll have to start deducting 10 points for every day. There's a point where it's not going to get you any points to turn it in after 10 days, right? That's the way math works. What else did I want to go over? Remember that there are only 2 papers that we're writing in this term, and they're worth together 40% of your semester average. So in a way, this paper is worth 20% of your semester grade. That's why I'm taking the time to go over it, offer you opportunities for help and questions and all that stuff. So make sure that you do whatever you need to do to make sure that it is good quality essay. Here is the scoring guide. If you click here, you can see what I'm going to be using to score it. I went over this last time a little bit, but I mean, I think the way that you can use this before you turn in your paper is just to look under, you know, the exceeds expectations category. I'm assuming that you want an 85 or better on the paper. So the thing to do is to look in this column and try to make a paper that does all these things. Here's another really effective way to use me as a tool for your better grades, and that is you can email me your paper and say, you know, I think I'm okay with most things, but can you help me with organization? I'm not sure that the ideas flow through the paragraphs. And then when I look at it, I'm going to focus on that. If you just say, can you give me some feedback? That's fine, but it's going to be whatever I think you need to focus on. And I may or may not talk about organization. So if you have a target area that you're worried about, you can identify that when you share your paper with me, if you share your paper with me, and I'll comment on it. I'll say, no, I think that's fine. And then you'll feel better about it because the person who's grading your paper said, no, it's fine. So maybe you want to send your paper and say, I don't think my thesis is complex enough to hit this exceeds expectation. Notice that this thesis is complex and clearly stated, and this 70 to 85 thesis is solid and logical, and the support is adequate. So there's a difference between complex and solid. So if you want to be over here, you could say, how's my thesis and my support? Is it solid or is it complex? You know, where am I on this rubric? And then you would have time to fix it before the paper is due. So that's a tool that you can use to make sure that you're doing, paying attention to all the aspects of the assignment. All right, after that, all that first page is just about the paper in general and how to do it and what I'm looking for and all that. The next part, all the rest of this part are just things to help you. So you can look at them or not, but they're available here for you. Here are some thesis examples using the different lenses with stories that we've already read. They're not on the list of your choices, but they're here for you to kind of get a feel for what a good thesis would be that would hit the 4 to 5 page range when you write it all out. Also, in your textbook, there are examples of critical theory papers. So if you are wondering what does a reader response kind of paper look like, you can go to page 1664 in your book and you can read a response that uses that lens and see how did they set it up. You can read the story or not, but you can see what's the organizational pattern, what are the kinds of things that they're saying if it's reader response. There's also a feminist example, a Marxist example, and a new historicist example in your text. So if you feel like, I don't really know if I'm phrasing this right, I don't know if I'm really doing what I'm supposed to in the paper, one option is to look at those examples. You can ask me too, but those are there also for you. If it's been a while since you wrote a literary analysis essay, then you can look at some of these. These are not specifically for lenses or for this assignment. So these are just about how to write a literary analysis paper. So here's an example that kind of outlines for you. Here's a sample paper. So it kind of outlines for you what a paper looks like, and then you can see that there are explanations of what's happening in the paper, how they're setting it up, and what's happening in the context of the paper, how the quoted material is being analyzed, and so on. So this is kind of like a little demo, I guess you could say. And so there are other analysis essays here for you to look at. Also, I put together a list of sources for things like how to write a literary analysis essay, what about introductions, what about conclusions, how can I use quotes effectively from my story. So all of these are videos and other resources to help support you while you're working on your paper. And then of course, a reminder about academic integrity. Make sure that if you look at other sources to help you understand the story, you shouldn't have to. They're not that difficult of stories. But if you do, just make really certain that you form your own ideas, that you just use that as background information, and that you don't use it to contribute to your own ideas. Because it can get muddy when you start typing up your paper, what's something that you read about versus what's something that you came up with. So you need to be making sure that you're coming up with it. You can read other stuff, but for me, it gets confusing. And besides, most of those things are other people's opinions, and you might not have that opinion of the story. Maybe your opinion is different. So, it should be a unique perspective on the lens in the story that you choose. There are a couple of things on Menti, so before I move into this week's assignments, I want to touch on them. Let's see, let me refresh it. Over here, I can put it up on the screen. Archetypal perspective, I think I went over that, but if you want me to talk about it with you in more detail, you can stick around when today's meeting is over, or we can converse on email or something like that. Does it matter what story we do it about? Yeah, you have to choose one of these that's at the top of the page right here. You have 7 to choose from. I picked a variety so that some are longer, some are shorter, some are modern, some are older, Anything else that you want to pop up on there that you want me to talk about before I move on from the paper? Waiting to see if anything appears. Okay, then let's talk about this week. Last week, I didn't make a reading assignment. Really, all you had to do was look at the 2 new lenses. I went light so that you could work on your paper. So hopefully you did and use that time, because the rest of the weeks do not do that. But this week, we're going to be moving into poetry next week. So one of your assignments for this week is to read some basic stuff on poetry for class next time. And I put the page numbers here. It's maybe 5 pages, I think, in the textbook. We're going to start working with poetry. But I also have an assignment for you to wrap up short fiction, which is due this Saturday. So this Saturday, the wrap up assignment is due. And next Saturday, the 10th, a week from Saturday, the paper's due. I try not to make them due on the same day because that's mean. So let's look at the assignment that I want you to do for wrapping up short fiction. You need to be able to look at a piece of fiction and analyze it for the elements that we've been reading about and studying. So I've listed them here with the basics about those elements and the page numbers where you can find the checklists about them. And what I want you to produce this week is an infographic that demonstrates your understanding of how short fiction elements work in a story. So you're going to choose one of the stories that we've already read from modules 1 through 5. You don't have to read a new story in order to do the assignment. Don't use the story that you're using for the research paper, for the paper. I put a list of the stories toward the end over here that we did. Here they are on page 2. So these are all the stories that you were assigned during the modules for short fiction. So you can use any of these. And I want you to create an infographic. An infographic is a visual representation of ideas. If you don't know what an infographic, you've seen them, maybe you just don't know the term infographic, or maybe you know all about them. So an infographic is like a visual of some idea. In this case, it's about yawning. You can see that it's broken into sections. It's very easily accessible information. So it's not an essay, it's not paragraphs. It's ideas that are presented in a really easy to view manner. There are a couple of different ones on this page. So there's the strongest element of the infographic is the graphic. So there'll be an image that in some way helps you to understand a concept. There are some words on it, but you can see that they're minimal. Here's another one about something with social media. So what you're going to be putting on your infographic will depend on which story you choose out of the ones that we've read. But everybody will be putting these fiction elements on their infographic. So if you choose yellow wallpaper, for example, then what are you going to say about character in yellow wallpaper? Find something interesting to say. You can use these tips. You can use the checklist on page 237. And so the whole infographic is about yellow wallpaper, but you should have these parts, right? These different sections going on. Why it's bugging me that one is over. I put some little tips here in the checklist pages to help you so that those elements go on there. I also put some literary infographic examples. Now, these are not examples of this assignment. I made this assignment up, so I don't think there's examples of it out there. But there are some examples of literary elements on some other infographics. And so probably, I don't think anybody in our school reads Catcher in the Rye, but I'll show you that one. So this one is set up with some of the literary devices in that piece. I don't know how long it's going to be. This one's kind of text heavy. It's like they're writing a bunch of little mini essays. Maybe the bottom of it's a little more logical. That kind of thing. The symbols in the story. Maybe a better example is the Animal Farm one. I don't know if you guys have read Animal Farm or not. So you can see that it's focused on images and presenting information about the novel in a graphic format. So you would just take all those elements that are listed and try to put them in an organized way into a graphic organizer like this. And it's up to you to structure that and use symbolic images to help you. Now, you might be thinking, that's so fancy. How am I going to finish that by Saturday? Well, my friend, templates. There's another one on Julius Caesar right here. Do y'all read Julius Caesar when you're sophomores? Right? The play, the Shakespeare play? Usually they have the sophomores read it in English too. So here is an infographic about Julius Caesar. So you can see there's sections. There are different elements that are addressed, symbolic things. So you can peruse those examples to help you. Now, how are you going to set it up? Well, you don't have to worry about that because there are 3 sources. The powerhouse is Canva. If you've never used Canva, I'm about to blow your mind. Maybe not. Maybe I'm more excited about it than you are. But here are a whole bunch of templates that you can just customize from Canva. So you find one that kind of has sections the way you want to present yours. There are timeline ones, and there's, you can take anything on here. Let's just find a good one. Let's see about this one. It doesn't matter if the subject of the template goes with the subject of the assignment because you can change everything that's on it. Just find one that's appealing to you or set up in a way, and then you can just go and change everything that's on it. You can change all the text, you can change the images, you can use their stock images over here. It does have a premium service, but I've never needed it because they have plenty of options with their free stuff. But just make sure you don't add anything that's got like a crown is their little thing. Like, can you see how this one has pro? If you use that one, then they're going to make you pay for it. So don't pick any of those. What happens is when you go to download it so that you have a, you know, finished version, they're going to say that'll be $4.95 because you used 4 different elements. So just use the free ones. It will say free. And so you can just completely reconstruct whatever element you want to for that particular infographic. And there's just tons of them to choose from. I'm just going through all the infographics. There's just a lot. So you can pick the one that you think would best showcase what you have to say about the story and those literary elements in the story. There are 2 other sites, but they're just not as complete. Venage and Visme are limited, but you might find something cool there that you want to use. There are also some tutorials on Canva in case you need that. So it's just about knowing what you want to say and organizing it. So when you're finished, let me show you on Canva. So when you are done with it on Canva, say this is exactly how I want it, then I'm going to go here to the download, and you can download it as a JPEG, a PNG, a PDF, you know, like whatever. Well, it's not going to be a video or a GIF, but you know, I would recommend either the JPEG or the PDF standard or print, either way. And then you're going to put it in 2 places when you're submitting on Saturday. One is on Blackboard. It tells up here that I want you to turn it in on Blackboard. And you're going to post your infographic for your classmates to see. We're going to spend some time looking at everybody's infographics as part of our review. So there is a Padlet where you can go to post your infographic. The way you do that is, well, there's the assignment page again in case you need it when you're there. You just go down here to the plus and it will give you a little box and you put your name in there. If you log in through STC, I think it will automatically put your name, but don't quote me. Put your name here, and then you can just upload your file. That's from some other stuff I was doing that way, so that we have a space where we can see everybody's infographics later on. We're going to use that to finalize our review. So what else do I have on here? Oh, the scoring guide is here. So the way that it's going to be scored. Again, anytime you get one of these rubrics, it's just good to see what are the qualities of the top end assignment. Exceeds expectations. I'm assuming you want to be in that category. Then it should meet these elements. Looking for organization, like the layout, the topic, Does it deal with all those terms that are listed, the objects, all those things? Accuracy, publication, grammar, spelling, punctuation. All those elements are important. So questions on the infographic assignment? Oh, it's gonna say no, I bet you. Okay.
Yeah, it says no.
All right, that's okay. It's good to know. I mean, I'm here to be helpful to you. So the things that you're working on this week are the infographic to show that you understand about all of those fiction terms, and also reading some of the text on poetry for next class period. And you should be moving along on your paper, but the paper is not due for another week and a half. So on Tuesday next week, if I need to address other issues with the paper, then I can certainly do that, like as a class, if there are questions. All right, both assignments are at the bottom here. So when you're ready to upload the infographic, you can go here and do that on Blackboard. And then the upload for the final draft of the paper is here. All right, is there anything that I can answer, go over, repeat, anything like that?
I think I'm good. I don't have any questions.
Okay. Anybody else? Let me go back to that Menti real quick and see. Nope. All right, then. I'm going to go ahead and end class. If something comes up, just communicate with me and I will do my best to help you. I hope you all have a good day.
You too, miss.
See you next week.
Bye.
Bye.